Have you ever been taught to believe that strength means being loud, fearless, unshaken in the storm? But if Nietzsche were standing in front of you, he would ask a question ruthless enough to strip away every layer of defense. Is what you call strength truly yours, or merely a role society molded for you when you were still too young to resist? We grow up inside ready-made definitions, repeated until they harden into instinct. Strength means obedience and propriety. Weakness means daring to want more than what is permitted. But Nietzsche does not care how strong you appear. The only thing he interrogates coldly and without mercy is this question: is your life guided by your own will or by the fear of being excluded? This video does not exist to reassure you that you are good enough. It exists to shatter the final illusion about strength, the illusion that makes people shrink themselves while still hallucinating that they are maturing. And if you are courageous enough to continue, you will realize that for Nietzsche, the question, are you strong or weak, was never a verdict. It is a summons, forcing you to look straight at yourself, not through the gaze of the world, not through the standards of the crowd, and not through the social stories drilled into you when you were still too young to choose. Number 1. Weakness is not essence. It is a story you were taught to believe. The question, are you strong or weak, sounds simple, but Nietzsche would never allow you to answer it so easily. He does not ask so that you may praise yourself, nor so that you may punish yourself. He asks in order to shatter the entire frame of reference you have unconsciously carried since childhood around the notions of strength and weakness. Because for Nietzsche, the core has never been whether you are strong or weak. It lies in which story you were taught to believe about yourself. Human beings are not born with a sense of weakness. A child who is just learning to walk falls, and then stands up again, without ever concluding that they are inferior. The child is simply operating according to the instinct of life, daring to try, falling, learning, and then continuing forward. But very early on, the world begins to pour into the child's ears soothing lullabies disguised as morality. You must be good to be loved. You must fit in to be safe. You must be pleasant to be accepted. You must know your place to be a good person. And layer by layer, that natural instinct to rise is wrapped tightly inside a morality that looks beautiful on the surface, but in truth, trains human beings to shrink. Nietzsche sees straight through that shell. He sees what most people avoid and dare not look at. Weakness is not essence. It is the product of a subtle conditioning process. You begin to call your inability to speak the truth humility. You call swallowing anger maturity. You call burying your own desires morality. And when this repeats long enough, you forget that there was once a part of you that wanted to rise, to test yourself, to reach for something greater than yourself. This mechanism reveals itself very clearly in modern life. I once knew a friend named Anna. When she first started working, Anna was sharp, bold, willing to think, to question, to point out what was wrong. But after only a few reminders, don't make things so tense. That idea sounds uncomfortable. This is just how things are done here. She began to adjust herself to fit the mold. She spoke less, held back more, chose silence instead of confrontation, chose safety instead of honesty with what she knew was right. A few years later, Anna no longer recognized herself. She described herself as not ambitious, just wanting stability, not competitive. But Nietzsche would never call that maturity. He would coldly point out, this was an original strength that had been bent and then relabeled as personality. Anna was not weak because she lacked ability. She was weak because she had learned not to believe that she was allowed to rise. Here lies the danger. When you shrink for long enough, you begin to believe that shrinking is your true personality. You say, "This is just how I am," when in reality, you are merely repeating an old survival strategy that has hardened into habit. Nietzsche calls this a form of collective self-deception, a place where human beings turn contraction into virtue simply to avoid facing a greater fear, the fear of living up to their true potential and paying the price of being different. If one must use an image, the lives of many people resemble a wild animal raised in a zoo. It is born with hunting instincts, with a body made to run, to fight, to live in freedom. But in the zoo, it is fed on schedule, confined to a space sufficient to survive but never enough to become itself. People walk by, point and praise it for being tame, and after long enough, it begins to believe that tameness is its nature. Then one day, that animal forgets the sound of its own roar. It forgets the free blood that once ran through it. It forgets that it was born to break boundaries rather than pace inside iron bars. It looks at those who still retain wild instinct and calls them dangerous. It looks at freedom and calls it an illusion. And here lies the tragedy. Its strength was never lost. Only the story it was taught to believe has crushed its capacity. For Nietzsche, any value that makes you fear your own vitality is a value that stands against life. Therefore, the question, are you strong or weak, according to Nietzsche, is never an emotional question. It is an invitation to expose illusions. How many parts of yourself have been cut away just to be called proper? How many desires have been buried alive because you feared judgment? How many times have you called fear reason in order to avoid action? When Nietzsche says in The Gay Science, "Become who you are," he is not lulling you with advice to accept yourself. He is declaring that becoming yourself is a painful dismantling, in which you must strip away stories that are not yours, impose definitions and molds that make you live smaller than your true capacity. And only when you face the truth that weakness is largely something you were taught, not something you were born with, do you step onto the first threshold of strength, the strength of a human being who stops betraying their own instinct for life. If this section makes you realize that the weakness within you is mainly a story that was drilled into you to believe, leave a comment and share the moment you began to shrink. When you called fear reason. When you called silence maturity. Write it out not to be comforted, but to look directly at the mechanism that has made you live smaller for far too long. Number 2. Herd morality. How society turns the weak into good people. Once you have seen the truth that weakness is largely not an inborn essence, you are forced to ask a much deeper question. If weakness is not essence, then why does an entire society treat shrinking as something right? Here, Nietzsche pushes you into more dangerous territory, where strength is not destroyed by violence, but by morality. In The Gay Science, he writes, "Morality is the herd instinct in the individual. This is not merely an observation, but an exposure of society's deepest mechanism of control. Human beings are taught not to live by inner strength, but to live in ways that make the crowd feel comfortable. Herd morality does not need prohibition. It only needs to make you believe that your difference is a threat. It plants the idea that avoiding discomfort in others is more important than becoming yourself. And because human beings fear being separated from the crowd more than they fear losing themselves, they adjust to meet collective expectations, not because they are weak, but because they do not want to be seen as outsiders. Nietzsche saw this clearly. Most people do not need to be oppressed. They oppress themselves to avoid the judgmental gaze of others. You can see this operating everywhere, in companies, schools, families, even in the most harmless-looking friend groups. The one who asks difficult questions is labeled troublesome. The one who dares to challenge is unpleasant. The one who refuses to compromise is lacking team spirit. Meanwhile, those who are always agreeable, always yielding, always placing others' needs first, are praised as kind, sweet, proper. But in Nietzsche's eyes, this is not kindness. It is self-minimization upgraded into morality. A friend of mine, Michael, was always described as strangely good. He always stepped back, always stood ready to help, always avoided conflict. On the surface, he was celebrated for this pleasantness. Inside, however, his life was a chain of quiet frustrations. No one saw him as a guide. No one entrusted him with decisions. No one came to him when they needed a true anchor. He became the ideal, good person of the herd, precisely because he threatened no one. Nietzsche would say plainly, Michael was not weak because he lacked ability. He was weak because herd morality molded him into a pleasant and harmless version of himself, then rewarded that shrinking as if it were a noble trait. This mechanism does not appear only in modern life. Even in Greek mythology, the story of Icarus reveals how the herd binds the strong. Icarus and his father, Daedalus, were trapped in a labyrinth and forced to create their own escape. Daedalus crafted 2 pairs of wings from feathers and wax and warned his son, "Do not fly too low, for the sea will pull you down, and do not fly too high, for the sun will melt the wax." These were the safe limits everyone accepted, but once airborne, Icarus felt freedom for the first time in his life. He wanted to know how far he could truly fly, so he flew higher, closer to the sun. The wax melted, the wings fell apart, and Icarus plunged into the sea. Society retells this story as a warning. The ambitious, those who fly too high, will be punished. Seen through Nietzsche's eyes, Icarus is not a symbol of excess, but of the individual who refuses to live within collective limits. His death, symbolically, was not a condemnation, but a reminder. Anyone who surpasses the norm must pay the price that the crowd always avoids. To legitimize its own fear, the herd turns caution into wisdom and daring into foolishness. This is the most refined mechanism of herd morality, the inversion of values so that weakness becomes the proper standard. Nietzsche points out a truth the crowd never admits. Society does not fear the wicked. Society fears the strong. The wicked can be controlled by law, but the strong, those not governed by shame, guilt, or the need for approval, are the greatest threat to herd order. Therefore, anyone who refuses to shrink is labeled selfish, cold, rebellious. Meanwhile, those who are agreeable, compliant, malleable, are wrapped in the most beautiful moral language. And here, Nietzsche poses the real question. Are you strong or weak? Is no longer a question of personality. It is the question of whether you submit to the herd or rise beyond it. The strong do not need to be loud. They need only one thing: to refuse to let herd standards decide how high they are allowed to reach. The weak are not necessarily incompetent. They need only one thing: to let herd morality define their limits for them. The strong, though solitary, keep moving forward. They understand that the price of strength is always separation from the crowd. And if you want to know where you truly stand, look at this cold question. Are you living to be accepted, or to become yourself in a way that no one can tame? Because only when you dare to answer that question through action do you step out of the shadow of the herd and onto the ground where true strength begins to form. Number 3. True strength is not controlling others. It is mastering yourself. After seeing how society gilds shrinking and turns weakness into moral virtue, you can understand why Nietzsche never grounds strength in external power. Any power that depends on the consent of the majority is fragile. The moment they change their minds, it collapses. Nietzsche does not accept a strength that can dissolve at the whim of the crowd. He shifts the focus to another form of power, quieter, harder to see, but impossible to confiscate. The power of a person who is no longer controlled by themselves. Nietzsche writes in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded." This is not a maxim, but a verdict. If you cannot command yourself, you will live your entire life under the commands of others. What many people label as strength, controlling others, status, influence, is, in Nietzsche's eyes, merely the shadow of true strength. A person may stand on a platform and direct hundreds, yet if they cannot overcome procrastination, impulse, and inner fear, they remain weak. True strength does not lie in how many people you dominate, but in no longer being dragged by lower instincts. This becomes very clear in everyday life. I once met a woman named Elena during a group sharing session. She had all the signs of a strong person: talent, leadership over a large team, and the trust of others. But Elena had one weakness: a fear of rejection. Her staff began to exploit that fear. They shifted responsibility onto her shoulders, asked her to do what they should have done themselves, missed deadlines while hoping she would understand, avoided conflict, and pushed her to the front line. And the tragedy unfolded exactly as expected. Elena worked more than anyone else, yet was valued the least. She tried to maintain the image of a good leader, while the team gradually treated her compliance as a given. One day, Elena said, "The more I try, the more power I lose." Nietzsche would look at Elena and say, her problem is not a lack of strength, it is that she does not know where to apply that strength, her inner domain. This is where will to power is often misunderstood. Nietzsche never advocated dominating others. Will to power, in its most original sense, is the will to rise above one's lesser self, the fearful part, the procrastinating part, the self-sabotaging part. It does not expand territory outward, it expands self-mastery inward. A person may lead no one, but if they are no longer ruled by cheap emotions, they are already stronger than most of the world. Scientific research on executive function, inner regulatory capacity, shows that those who can regulate attention, delay impulsive reactions, and orient emotions possess higher psychological stability, greater long-term success, and are less shaped by their environment. True strength, in scientific language, is inward-facing. The strongest voice is not the one that silences the world, but the inner voice from which you cannot escape. Nietzsche understood this long before science had the language to prove it. When he spoke of strength, he did not speak of muscles, status, or authority. He spoke of the depth of a human being who dares to face inner chaos without fleeing. The weak seek someone to cling to. The strong stand before that chaos and say, "I will overcome you, not with hope, but with discipline." But self-mastery is not a romantic goal. It is a real battle. Your enemy is not other people. It is the parts of you that have grown too comfortable with convenience. They whisper, "Do it tomorrow. Don't push too hard. It's risky. Don't try." Nietzsche called this self-deception the greatest enemy of humankind. You do not need anyone to weaken you. You only need to listen to those whispers long enough. This is the kind of weakness Nietzsche despised most. Weakness disguised as reason. You call hesitation caution. You call procrastination waiting for the right time. You call self-doubt humility. Will to power, in its purest form, is tearing away those inner lies to see clearly how much you have restrained yourself. And this is precisely what makes inner strength the highest form of power. It cannot be taken away. No one can take the discipline you have forged. No one can take the emotional control you have built. No one can take the will you have shaped through confronting yourself. Empires may fall, positions may be lost, people may leave, but self-mastery does not. And from here, Nietzsche returns to the core question: are you strong or weak? The answer does not lie in how many people you control, but in the degree to which you control yourself. True strength is not standing above others, but standing firm when all external supports disappear. If you keep promises to yourself when no one is watching, if you do what is difficult when no one praises you, if you subdue fear and self-destructive instincts within, you have touched the level of strength Nietzsche considered supreme, the strength of a human being who overcomes themselves. And if these words awaken in you a feeling that is hard to name, both painful and bright, share this video with those who are also struggling with their inner world. And if you wish to continue this uncompromising journey, the journey of dismantling every illusion, every excuse, every whisper that makes you shrink, press subscribe. Not to follow me, but to remind yourself that from today onward, you choose to become the one who commands yourself, instead of the one ruled by yourself. Number 4. Shame, the subtle weapon of weakness. From the moment you begin to see that strength or weakness no longer lies in the old stories others once drilled into you, you step into a territory where each choice is no longer an instinctive reflex, but an act of will shaping yourself. Yet right at that threshold, Nietzsche points to an enemy more refined than any open pressure: shame. Not natural shame, but the kind planted by herd morality, the kind that teaches human beings to fear their own vitality. It does not erupt in the moment of wrongdoing. It quietly causes people to shrink even when no one is watching. A form of invisible punishment where society no longer needs to command, because you have already become your own jailer. Nietzsche once wrote in The Gay Science, "What is the seal of attained liberty? To be no longer ashamed of oneself." He was not speaking of numbness, but of the moment when a person looks straight at the truth that the most dangerous chains are not on their hands, but in their mind, under the form of shame. Shame is the mechanism that makes you self-censor your own instincts. You begin to ask whether you are too much, too different, wanting too much, too ambitious. It turns every expression of vitality into a risk of exclusion. You remain silent not because you want to be silent, but because you fear being misunderstood. You do not dare to try not because you lack ability, but because you fear being laughed at. You do not dare to speak the truth not because you are fake, but because you fear making someone uncomfortable. And gradually, no one needs to restrain you anymore, because you restrain yourself for them. Nietzsche saw this long ago. The weak do not need prisons, because they carry the jailer within. Imagine a girl who loves to sing. At a family gathering, a single casual remark from a relative is uttered. Your voice isn't very good. It sounds a bit strange. No one tells her to be silent, and no one forbids her from singing again. But from that moment on, every time she is about to raise her voice, a small hesitation appears first, then gradually turns into an invisible voice whispering, "Don't show it, people will laugh." And so she stops singing, not because the desire is gone, but because she has learned to believe that expressing herself is a risk. You see, shame does not only kill an action, it kills a part of one's essence. And if an image is needed to clearly see this mechanism, imagine a door that is not locked, yet you carry the wrong key. The door was never locked. No one is blocking you. No real barrier exists. But because you keep trying to turn a mismatched key, you conclude that you can never pass through. The tragedy lies precisely there. The door is not closed. Only you believe you have no right to walk through it. Shame operates in exactly the same way. It makes you block your own path, even though the path was never locked. According to Nietzsche, this is the most refined form of weakness. Human beings adjust themselves to fit standards that are not their own. No one needs to forbid you from living according to your nature. Shame has already done that for them. No one needs to supervise you. Shame makes you supervise yourself. No one needs to judge you. Shame makes you judge yourself before the world ever speaks. Strength, according to Nietzsche, begins precisely at the point where you stop asking permission to exist. When you stop asking whether you are allowed to want more. When you stop treating your instincts as enemies. When you no longer retreat simply because you fear making someone uncomfortable. When you realize that shame is not morality, but a mechanism of control. In that very moment, you reclaim a part of freedom you did not know you had lost. The freedom to be yourself without approval. Nietzsche would ask you a very simple but far from gentle question. What in you is alive, and what in you is afraid to live? The weak are not those without potential, but those who allow shame to decide how far they are permitted to go. The strong, even while trembling, still move forward, because they know that strength does not lie in the absence of fear, but in refusing to let fear decide one's destiny. And if you truly want to know whether you are strong or weak in the Nietzschean sense, do not look at what you display. Look at what you are holding back. Are you silent out of wisdom or out of shame? Are you humble out of maturity or out of fear of being seen? Are you well-behaved, or are you shrinking yourself so the crowd can feel comfortable? That answer does not only define your strength, it defines the total freedom you possess, the freedom that determines whether you are strong or weak in the true Nietzschean sense. And the very moment you are lucid enough to look straight at it, without fleeing, without excuses, is also the moment you begin to step out of the transparent cage you have built for yourself for far too long. To live, for the first time, as a strong human being in the existential sense, not strong in the eyes of the herd. Number 5. Loneliness is not a sign of weakness. It is the price of strength. You cannot ask, "Am I strong or weak?" In the Nietzschean sense, without passing through this territory, the territory most people try to avoid. Because true strength never places you at the center of the crowd, it pulls you out of it. Not the kind of loneliness soaked in self-pity, but the loneliness of someone who has crossed beyond the standards the majority must cling to in order to feel safe. Nietzsche wrote, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly." This is not merely a distance between people, it is a declaration. Your altitude determines how others see you. And at that height, loneliness is not a sign of weakness. It is the inevitable price of strength. When you live according to your true nature, when you refuse to shrink yourself to soothe the anxieties of others, when you no longer allow herd morality to set the limits of your ambition, you will see the crowd drift away from you before you ever drift away from them. Not because they are bad, but because you have stepped beyond the altitude at which they are accustomed to living. Nietzsche called this a shift in the altitude of the soul. You no longer belong to the low climate, and the low climate can no longer contain you. Loneliness emerges as a natural result, not a punishment. The stories of geniuses repeat this motif again and again, and Nietzsche saw it so clearly that he turned it into a rule. Those who dare to step out of the safe zone are misunderstood before they are respected. Look at Steve Jobs. In the early years of Apple, he was seen as difficult, extreme, lacking tact. Few understood that he endured a long period of near-total solitude within his own vision, being pushed out of the company he founded, being called delusional, being labeled incompatible with collaborative culture. Yet it was precisely those solitary years, when no one believed what he believed, that forged a Nietzschean steel shell in him. Endurance, refusal of mediocrity, and absolute loyalty to intuition. Jobs was not strong because he succeeded. He succeeded because he endured the lonely altitude of the strength he carried. But you do not need to be a genius to understand this paradox. I once knew a young man named Samuel. One day, he changed his entire lifestyle, cutting out parties, focusing on study, training his body, learning new skills. When asked why, he simply said, "I want to see who I could become if I stopped doing what everyone else is doing." Soon after, his close friends began to drift away. No one said it outright, but everyone felt uneasy. They could no longer see themselves in Samuel. He was teased as too much, too serious, no fun anymore. But Samuel did not regret it. "For the first time in my life, I feel strong, even if I'm alone." Nietzsche would say, that was the moment a human being shifted from belonging to the herd to belonging to their own being. Loneliness, in Nietzsche's eyes, is the space where the individual takes responsibility for their own existence. When you no longer seek applause to determine right and wrong, when you no longer use recognition as a measure of value, you enter what Nietzsche called the depth of existence. You live not to be liked, but to become. And every journey of becoming demands separation from the spiritual cradle of the crowd. The paradox Nietzsche wants you to face is this. Most people believe they fear loneliness, but what they truly fear is the process of becoming oneself in loneliness. Because in that silence, there is no one left to blame, no one left to cling to, no distraction left to hide behind. You must face the parts of your being you have long avoided, the capacities you never dared to enter, the desires you buried, the dreams you once betrayed to please others. That loneliness is not comfortable, but it is the only door that leads to existential strength. Nietzsche asserted that the strongest souls share one common trait. They walk ahead before the world understands them. And misunderstanding is not proof that you are wrong. It is proof that you are walking a path that does not belong to the herd. When Nietzsche spoke of the Creator, he declared, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. But the crowd does not accept chaos. They fear it. That chaos can only be nurtured in solitude, where you are not forced to shrink to fit someone else's mold. Therefore, if you truly want to know whether you are strong or weak according to Nietzsche, do not look at how many people walk beside you. Look at your ability to keep moving when no one stands with you. Loneliness is not the sign of someone left behind. It is the sign of someone who has begun to climb to a height the crowd cannot yet reach. If you can stand firm there, amid silence, misunderstanding, and the absence of validation, you are touching the level of strength Nietzsche considered the rarest, the strength of a human being who has risen beyond the herd and begun to stand on their own existential ground. And if by this point you begin to suspect that your exhaustion never truly came from life itself, but from wearing too many layers to become a palatable version of yourself, then press like on the video as a silent but real sign, a sign that you have begun to see. And once you have seen, you will never return to living as before. Because the question, are you strong or weak, is not a question of image, but a question of will. Are you willing to pay the price of strength or not? Number 6. Strong or weak is not a feeling. It is how you live each day. From everything you have passed through, Nietzsche leads you to a final conclusion, simple yet razor-sharp. Strength is not an emotional state, but the way you live each day. It does not lie in moments of exhilaration, but in the quiet rhythm where you can no longer escape yourself. Nietzsche never cared about moments when people feel strong. Those moments are always fragile, easily blown away by circumstance. What he truly wants to know is this: how do you live when no one is watching? How do you face disappointment? How do you respond when you are misunderstood through composure or through woundedness? When faced with a difficult choice whose consequences no one else will know, what do you do? Because for Nietzsche, human beings are not defined by fleeting emotions, but by repeated actions, where true strength is forged through discipline, responsibility, and the capacity to stand on one's own. He once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "There is more wisdom in your body than in your deepest philosophy." That reminder strikes directly at the illusion of the modern age. Strength does not come from beautiful thoughts, but from the actions you repeat until they become your core. If you observe life honestly, you will see that the line between the strong and the weak does not lie in the emotions they experience, but in the choices they repeat. The weak may still erupt in courage for a moment. The strong may still have days of confusion. The difference lies in direction. The weak live by reaction. The strong live by choice. The weak act according to fear. The strong act despite fear. The weak wait for inspiration. The strong create their own rhythm. And none of this arrives with thunder. It arrives through quiet repetition. I once knew a man named Derek who spent 3 years trapped in an exhausting loop. Every evening after work, he lay sprawled on the couch, wrapped in the blue light of a screen, promising that tomorrow will be different. But tomorrow never was. One evening, after turning off Netflix halfway through for no clear reason, Derek realized what Nietzsche had always pointed to. He did not lack motivation. He lacked the will to lead himself. That night, he did one single thing. He walked for 20 minutes around his neighborhood, not for health, not for discipline, but to test whether he truly had control over himself. The next night, he walked again, then a few minutes more. Then he cut back one numbing habit. No one saw it, no one praised him, no one asked why. Yet after only a few weeks, Derek realized that what had changed was not his body, but his inner axis. He began to believe in his own promises again, something he had lost for many years. When he later spoke of it, Derek said, "I'm not stronger because I walk. I'm stronger because I do what I say I will do." And that is precisely what Nietzsche wanted to show. Strength does not arise from a moment of enthusiasm, but from the actions you force yourself to carry out, especially when no one is watching and no one cares except you. Modern science inadvertently confirms Nietzsche. Research on self-regulation and executive control shows that the ability to regulate daily behavior predicts long-term success better than thousands of hours of positive emotion. People who habitually finish what they start, take responsibility for mistakes, and continue acting even without enthusiasm, possess greater psychological stability, stronger resilience, and are less shaped by circumstance. In other words, science confirms what Nietzsche said more than a century ago. Strength is not the feeling of, "I can do this," but the behavior of, "I still do it, even when I don't want to." But Nietzsche does not want you to stop at understanding. He wants you to live it. What does that mean? It means that when fear appears, you do not retreat, but take one small step forward. When misunderstood, you hold your truth without the need to justify it. When tired, you do not surrender to indulgence, but choose real restoration. When a great desire rises, you do not lull yourself with, "I'm not ready," but begin with the smallest action you can take today. Strength, according to Nietzsche, is not grand moments. It is the steady footsteps of someone who no longer wishes to betray themselves. Finally, Nietzsche forces you to confront the core point. The question, "Are you strong or weak?" becomes meaningless if you answer it with momentary emotions. You may feel strong because of a good day and feel weak simply because you lost sleep. But if you observe how you live each day, how you take responsibility, how you face pain, how you act when no one is watching, how you stand firm in silence, you will see a simple and ruthless truth. Strength or weakness is neither personality nor fate. It is the result of choices you repeat until they become your final form. Therefore, Nietzsche would never ask, "Do you feel strong or weak today?" Emotions can always deceive you. He would ask instead, "How did you live today, and how many times have you repeated that?" Because true strength does not appear on the day you feel extraordinary, but on the day you do the right thing when no one knows, no one praises you, and no one witnesses it except yourself. The one person Nietzsche believed you must never betray. If you have come this far, it means you have dared to face what Nietzsche always wanted human beings to confront. Strength has never lain in appearance, volume, or the gaze that makes others wary. Strength, according to Nietzsche, appears only when you have the courage to dismantle the stories the herd has carved into your mind. about obedience, about pleasantness, about the limiting mold you are supposed to confine yourself within. Understand this clearly. Nietzsche does not ask you, strong or weak, to give you a comforting label. He asks to force you to witness the coldest truth. You are strong when you live as if your life belongs to you. You are weak when you let the world live in your place. And if right now something small is stirring within you, a silence, a vibration, a recognition difficult to name, know that this is the first marker. You are ready to enter the only journey Nietzsche considered worthy. The journey of becoming strong in the existential sense, not strong in the sense of approval. If this touches you, end with a vow in the comments. I choose strength, not the story I was taught, but the one I create. And from the moment you write that sentence down, you are no longer the person who entered this video. You are the first version of yourself, the version the herd no longer has the right to touch.